Welcome to our devotion for reading through the Bible in a year in the One Year Bible, and this is the devotion for September 29th. We're looking at our Old Testament from Isaiah chapter 57, verse 15 through 59, verse 21, and we'll look at Isaiah chapter 58, which has verses 1 through 14. In Isaiah's theology, and is mentioned here in this reading, the Sabbath plays a huge role. As God's people take it upon themselves to observe the Sabbath in a meaningful way as they wait for the near salvation of the Lord and the full demonstration of his righteousness. In other words, keeping the Sabbath marks out those who join themselves to the Lord. Key components of the Sabbath for us today include honoring, preaching, and the Word of God by our own faithful worship attendance. Plus, I believe that Sabbath practices are important even outside of worship. For example, taking not just a day off, but an opportunity to give your mind and body and spirit the ability to change gears or slow down or effect a change in your routine that gives you time and margin to be able to mindfully engage in prayer and devotion and service. Even in the Old Testament, as well as within Judaism today, there is more to Sabbath than meets the eye. Isaiah draws on the richness of the Sabbath rhythms of the people of God through the centuries. And Isaiah chapter 58 presents the Sabbath ideal for God's people. Earlier in Isaiah 56 through 57, we were given a contrast to the Sabbath ideal as we glimpsed the rather sad actual state of God's people that they were in as they waited for salvation. And yet again in chapter 59, we'll see a different contrast as well. We see how the Lord's people were very conscious of their own failings. This, in turn, prepares them and us for the grand vision later in Isaiah of what God proposes to do. Now, in the work Gulliver's Travels, the character Dean Swift said of the ladies of his day that they were so busy being religious that they had no time to say their prayers. Isaiah could have identified with that. He saw the sort of religiosity that surrounded the Sabbath in his day, even as God's people had forgotten what the Sabbath was actually about. Today, things are a little different. We have effectively constructed a week with 2 Saturdays at the end of it, and 1 hour on a Sunday morning is what we reserve for the Lord's Day, and sometimes congregations quibble about which hour that might be. The prophet Jeremiah would have joined in with Isaiah in making the Sabbath an emphasis, and along with that emphasis, seeing it as a divinely appointed means of blessing. How many of us make such an emphasis and look for such a blessing? Isaiah wasn't only talking about a day of not working, or much less of being bored with keeping idle. He looked for a day of concern for the welfare of those we influence, of making sure that we do not exploit others in our desire to keep the Sabbath. He looked for a day kept in such a way that excluded family strife and promoted family harmony, a day to care for the needy, the homeless, the underdogs, and even our relatives in need. Such concern extended to society as a whole. So this kind of Sabbath is filled with many things, of course, but if all we're left with is being exhausted at the end of it, we have not kept it as it was intended to be kept. Isaiah gives many examples of ways to break out of our work week routine, but it is also a way for God's grace to break into our lives, bringing God's renewal to us, lifting our depression, refreshing us spiritually, elevating us to joy, and bringing us the dual promise of security in the strength of the Lord and in his answer to our prayer. that is certainly a very meaningful day and a very meaningful way to celebrate as we too wait for the salvation of the Lord to impact our lives and the lives of others, as it most certainly will. May God be with